Hello and welcome to Dawn English. I'm Nadia Naqi with you. Today we're going to be discussing something which is very concerning and has always been a cause of concern in Pakistan. It's freedom of press. We've seen in the past, whether military rules or democratic setups, journalists have been tortured, have been abducted. There have been news of media in chains. There have been, media has been subject to control. But there are a lot of factors that go into it. We know that the Pakistani media landscape has been growing tremendously, from print medium to the state TV, then the electronic media, and now we have social media. That has, of course, pros and cons. So in this scenario, where we see the political landscape being highly polarized, we also see that within the fraternity, that is the journalist fraternity, we see a sharp divide. It's very, very difficult to operate as objective journalists. In recent times, we've seen that journalists have been silenced. Their shows have trained a lot of journalists in newsrooms. And this is something that I thought that Owais Tohid would be able to shed more light. And Mona, of course, not only being a female journalist that are subject to different kind of, I would say these days, torture, I'd say, because, if you're part of the social media, if you're part of social platforms where you want to speak your mind, you are then faced by this, vicious campaigns and trolls. Thank you so much. Owais, I'd like to start with you. Do you agree that there is a divide within the journalistic community now, within media organizations, and that is causing a huge, I would say, problem, not only for working journalists, but is also challenging for journalism as a profession?
Thank you, Nadia. Absolutely, the division, there's no doubt about it. And especially since the ouster of General Pervez Musharraf in 2008, when the media owners thought themselves of being kingmakers and they tried to jump into the ring of state players with the judiciary, with the establishment, and the political players. And I think that has harmed media so much that I can't tell you. I've been a part of this electronic media for the last 15, 16 years. And I know its ups and downs. But the division also reflects the overall trends of society, dangerous trends of society, which is highly polarized, which has highly polarized public and political domain, and especially in a society where we're living, where extremism and militancy are on rise. The space of saying things or questioning the powerful, which is the very essence of the media, has shrunk. Initially, you could talk in roadside hotel, roadside cafes. Then it has to press clubs, and now you can't even talk about those sensitive issues in the clubs, and you keep on mistrusting your own colleagues, that who is working for whom, and if it is leaked, will it pose a serious threat to your own life? So, if we talk about the overall media, Pakistan media is in serious danger and working under the dark shadows of state and non-state actors. Reportage and opinions on sensitive issues trigger the scrutiny by powerful circles, is posing serious risks to journalists, especially the working journalists who are in the field. And in addition to that, Nadia, with the availability of cyberspace, where the so-called suppressed or ignored or neglected people got the space to challenge the authority without being noticed, it has also been largely misused by political parties and sectarian groups, especially PTI among the political parties. It has set the trend of having troll armies, online mob lynching, political parties are using fake news to push their political agenda and shoving it into the bellies of media, mainstream media. And look at the channel, you could say that it is pro-establishment or pro-PTI, or it is pro-PMLN, which is sad.
Which is very sad. Exactly. Okay, you highlighted some very important issues, and those are very concerning issues. And I'd like that Mona also, pitch in this one. When Owais says that, it has become very difficult to have a discussion with your fellow colleagues also during, in press club. Do you feel, Mona, that some of the journalists have been working for not for journalism, but as probably, they're tools of either the establishment or different political parties?
So I want to go just push back a little bit and say one of the challenges all over the world in the media has been coming up with a definition for a journalist. Who is a journalist? Unlike lawyers or doctors who need licenses to practice journalism, nobody really does. So you have now, with the disruption that has been caused by digital media, you now have a large group of people claiming to be journalists. And that includes, of course, from traditional media, you have reporters and copy editors and op-ed columnists and editors. Now you have YouTube bloggers, you have people who've got their little Instagram, and everyone's sort of in this big mesh. And it's propaganda, excuse me, it's content creation, it's a whole bunch of things. So it's only natural in a way that there's going to be a lot of conflict and there's going to be a lot of strife. And I think that we also have to look at media organizations that are hiring people, what kind of training is taking place in media organizations, what kind of relationships do media owners have with political parties or governments when you have cross-media ownership laws. There's going to be a lot of tension. I don't know who to put the one blame on, but I do think that a lot of this may be resolved if you had organizations coming together to talk about proper training, proper mechanisms in place, and a sort of unity. You spoke earlier about why is it that when in 2007, when Musharraf, for example, stopped the airing of channels, I remember Owais and I met up at a protest in Karachi. I think, Owais, I think you even courted arrest, if I remember correctly. And that was the time you saw the unity. But now you have, I don't even know how many press clubs and unions there are within those press clubs. The division is there. Unfortunately, I don't know what the answer is to help heal those divisions, but certainly it's something that people need to think of, journalists need to think about and try to come up with a resolution themselves rather than having one enforced upon us in the form of regulatory laws.
Right. So, Mona, when you say divisions, and you also spoke about the media organizations, and these two things are very, very important. I'm going to be talking about the journalistic bodies. Where are those bodies? What could they do to bridge this gap, to get everything back on track? When I had stepped into journalism, you had said that, he said that, if you need to understand the editorial policy for any newspaper, you need to read the editorial for it. And more so, you would realize, especially during the election. But now I don't even need to read the editorial. Then came, these channels, the mainstream media. And unfortunately, we don't have to wait for any elections. The very strong editors used to be in place. They used to challenge any kind of media ownership, saying this is not what journalism is about. This is not what we're going to air. It's about business and it's about relations with the media owners that, powerful corridors have.
And I said that sadly, the transition of electronic media was from state media to state-run media. State, which are called owners, and and we are all familiar with the word of state, and they have got the monopoly on the media groups. And the second part is that you generate revenues through ads. and ads are driven by corporate sector. It's not subscription based. It's not digital to home or as you would find in the West, where you have to pay a certain amount of money to get a magic box, to get a bouquet of channels. Here, it's different. You rely on the campaigns of state institution or government-run organizations, or you rely on the major tool of the government, which is called information history, and it puts it tightens the screws on you whenever it wants to. After
Right.
the ousting of Sheriff, the state institution realized that it's a great weapon to tighten the screws. If you make these media houses bleed every month in millions, so they tighten the screws, and then they directly make inroads into the so-called household names bouquet of our anchors who were on TV channels since 2002. They became household names, they became very popular. And then there is a nexus. There was a nexus which was developed between the states and was not all the anchors, many anchors, and the state players or vested interests. And that has tarnished the sanctity of the office of and then what had happened that these states or these owners realized that they can actually have their media managers who can say yes to everything which they would dictate to newsrooms. So it doesn't mean that you and I or anybody else can justify the ban on ARY and the arbitrary decision to revoke its license or its withdraw its operating license overnight by PAMRA, which is a tool used by the military regimes and sadly the elected governments, including PTI, PMLN, and so on and so forth. So now, for example,
one thing, Owais, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. So what options are journalists left then working for these organizations? Like you just named Geo, you named ARY, and we know that, in the previous government, ARY was being called primarily as, as PTV2. And now the same goes for the tilt that Geo has for PMLN, that, they're being the B team of the government. So what happens to the journalists working within these organizations? Is it the economic factor that, that probably because it's a job that they're doing, that they may not be able to exercise those objective values that a journalist should have, or the ethics that should be in practice? Is that the reason? Or do you feel that even journalists are just probably they have also kind of like tuned in their mind that this is the right track, this is the right policy, this government or this political party, and so what if we're speaking so pro a political party?
It depends a lot on the editor. Even if the management decides to be a part of any camp, all over the world, they are declared editorial policy. Here, it's not a declared policy that you are pro or against anybody or you're pro. But the journalistic organizations are not entitled to or not meant to run campaigns to be a part of any camp or run a campaign against any political party or an institution. So I'm just saying that the working journalist can work and sanity can prevail if the editor is professional and who is heading the daily news affairs. Editor can play a role of a buffer between the management and the rest of the staff, and that happens, But what I'm trying to suggest here that all is not lost. so all is not lost.
Hmm,
But
yeah.
the major problem that is with the overall mechanism of our dynamics of electronic media. For example, commercial interests of these organizations,
Sure.
and which triggers corporate dictate. They're state-run. They're not listed companies, so their financial health cannot be measured independently. They should declare when they 24/7, 365 days a year, they say that they are running into losses. So they are not waging a jihad. They are professional. They are running professional organizations. And I'm saying it on full authority that I have run so many channels, and I know the inside out, and I won't diverge that financial info, but I can say that no channel is running into losses. If it is running into losses, then it should declare what kind of losses they are running into.
Exactly. So,
Has
so
to be there. So, one declare the editorial policy. B, that code of conduct should be posted on their website. C, that if they have got a complaint, if they are under duress or they are under pressure from any
Right.
state, any intelligence agency, any government organization, they should give it in writing. They should give it in writing to PFUJ, which is the trade union body of journalists of Pakistan. And fourth, that their coverage, they should give an undertaking. Their coverage should not reflect that they are biased or they are becoming a tool, or they have become a tool of any group, any individual, or any political party, or any state institution. And that has been the case. Nothing is in writing. Everything is like when there is a ban, they come and then they put you like on a barrel of the gun, saying that now 4,000 working journalists are losing jobs and they are on the verge of losing their jobs. So do something about it, and we take to the roads. Nothing is in writing. I think the states should make it very clear.
Okay. So now where is journalism headed? Because Una, I'll just come to you first. That now we see that there are people who are YouTubers and they call themselves journalists, but we've seen them actually being on a party's wagon along with the party supporters and chanting slogans against celebrated veteran journalists and especially women journalists. So how do you basically for viewers who are watching YouTube, who are listening to them, they probably read what they write. So how do you actually, tell these people that this is not journalism and this is journalism? So where is this heading, and how to get, like OT says, all is not lost. How do you get real journalists back and make people believe that this is news, this is, creation of content, and this is fake, and this is propaganda?
I think the good starting point is to swallow some very bitter pills. And I'm speaking generally here for traditional and digital media, which is to understand their audience and to understand why audiences, again, around the world are not trusting the news. There is a wide gap. The trust deficit is massive. How do you reclaim that? And I think one thing for the media to understand as part of the acceptance is that it has an impact on the political process. It has an impact on how it shapes public discourse. So I think it requires a little bit of going back and understanding what is its role in this entire ecosystem. And largely it's to hold the power to account. I think a lot of this process, understanding it and regaining people's trust. So that may require, for example, we have an election coming up at some point. And I think that that's a very important starting point to understand. What are you doing? Covering live speeches is the easiest thing to do. Having people come on TV after the live speech and fight it out for ratings is an easy thing to do. The hard thing to do is provide context and how you frame the story. Whichever your medium, framing and context is important. maybe we need to, we being the media folks, need to move away from the easy and the cheap shots and go back to what the media should be doing, which is reporting across the board. We have focused so much on Imran Khan's speeches that very little reporting is taking place on the floods in Balochistan. And why do you think that's important? Because there is a political process in place, and this is all going to impact how the elections play out. There's a tie-in that we need to be aware of.
Okay, very well put. But do you see that happening, Mona? Because you see, again, what Owais also mentioned, we don't see media organizations actually changing. So do you think that the journalist bodies can now pitch in and play a good role and define?
Is there a solution? I don't know if there's a solution, but I do think it might be interesting to take a leaf from CNN, who is now in the last 4 months under new owners. And its new head, Chris Licht, is doing some pretty dramatic things. He recently stopped the recording of Reliable Sources, which is one of their top shows, because he said the channel is no longer neutral. So if you, as an organization, want to make a difference, at this point, this is going to hurt your business. I'm sure it's hurting your business already if people aren't watching you or tuning into you. That's what I think. The reckoning will come from a mix of media owners, media workers, and journalist organization if they're worried about the future.
Briefly, Nadia, United Journalists and United Media Houses, they can provide a shield. And that is the only option left right now in our society, where political and public domain are highly polarized. And that's for sure that capitulation should not be an option.
So, but do you not think we already have PBA where all these, electronic media owners or probably the chief executives, they all sit together to discuss everything. But if one channel is being shut, or in the previous government, we saw geos or junk groups, the editor-in-chief being behind the bars, we did see all PBA getting together, all these organizations getting together to have a united voice.
I believe that professional editors' body is the only solution which can play a buffer between the management and the ones who are putting pressure, those who basically are sending the clouds of dark shadows over journalism in Pakistan, which is in a serious danger.
Okay, my last question, because this is what is really challenging and concerning for me is because we've heard what used to, I've seen Musharraf Sera as a working journalist, and I'm sure all of you, who've seen more than I have, Wes, you have seen so many dictatorial rules. I'd start with you and then go to Mona about this. Do you not feel that in a democratic setup, media has been subject to control? And that is more concerning because when you're in opposition, these political parties would just sit with the media organizations, would sit with working journalists and say, hey there, we stand by the freedom of press and freedom of speech. But when they take over as government, they bring the draconian laws and they do the same kind of stuff what probably the previous governments do. And this happening in a democratic setup is more concerning than you would say would happen in a military rule, because in a military rule you do expect this happening.
That's very true, Nadia. Pakistan state has had a history of fraught relationship with the media, decades of covert and overt military interventions and unstable civilian governments. They have actually painted a map on the canvas of journalism that the journalism is going to be the under duress of those are at the helm of affairs. So to begin with, we don't have a rich tradition of freedom of speech or freedom of expression since the 50s. Be in the 60s or during the Ayub Khan, or even during Zulfikar Bhutto's times, who came as the most popular leader in Pakistan political history, but turned into aristocratic or all-powerful, and who put his rivals in jails. Then we have experienced the dark era of Ziaul Haq, General Ziaul Haq, and everyone is aware of that. And then during General Pervez Musharraf, who gave us a chance of having these TV channels, but on 3rd of November 2007, he imposed an emergency, and then so we were all again on the roads. So, and then I believe that PPP is the only party which has got the stomach of absorbing dissenting voices. I mean, it's not an ideal situation, but if you compare within our political establishment,
Right.
PMLN has had a history. It has laid foundations of PICA ordinance during Nawaz Sharif's tenure, third tenure from 2013 to 2018. Then Mr. Imran Khan, now who is facing the tremendous pressure from the institutions, he himself came up with the broad-based policy of PICA ordinance that it is mandatory to control the fake news. That's what he said. So I'm trying to suggest here that be it military regime or be it political regime,
Right.
we have faced hardships. So it doesn't mean that the journalism is buried down under the garbage of these blockades. It has developed. It has evolved. Ask Mona. I mean, we have worked for Newsline magazine. It used to be operated from a small office, and Razia Bhatti, late Razia Bhatti, such a courageous lady that we have learned as an editor. I've learned courage from her, the way she used to raise voice against any powerful person, in a powerful institution from a small office. There were no guards. They were all. It was run by ladies. It was run by females, mostly females, and we were like so 2-3 boys who used to work there. So I'm just saying that it can happen, and it should happen. That is the only road of survival, but the survival lies in the unity, and that full stop, period.
The unity. When you talk about different political parties, Muna, I do agree what Owais said about People's Party still having a large heart probably to stomach everything. And they have been doing that with one particular channel who they have always objected, calling them Sai Sarkar, in Sindh especially. But People's Party is part of this coalition government, and ARY's shutting, I haven't seen that kind of remarks from the People's Party Supremo or probably the chairman coming out in the open saying that this is not what we're going to, probably stand with. So this is also one thing that we must note. The other thing is that I'd like to ask you towards the end of this, that in democratic setups, how concerning is it for you that media is being so controlled? And do you feel that still print medium is one probably branch that still is very objective in terms of journalism and follows the ethics more than any other medium that we have?
So I think that I don't even know if we've really experienced any kind of democracy in the way that we have been taught at schools and universities. I don't think this last government, Imran Khan's, can champion itself as a democracy. I don't know if Pakistan has really experienced democracy in the last decade. And it's hard to talk about that without recognizing that relationships between democratic governments and media organizations, really analyzing and researching what's there, what are the business connections due to cross-media ownership laws. But I do think, I agree completely with Owais, who said that editors have an amazing role to play as as people that can help push back the resistance. They can be resistors. I also think that the one group of people that we really don't talk about in this are the folks in newsroom who are on very poor salaries, whether it's the NLE or it's the copy editor or it's the graphics folks. They're working in very, very bad conditions, often also toxic environments. I think this is something I hope that we can also take into consideration when we talk about gathering people together. Unions need to reach out to younger journalists to bring them on board because there is strength in numbers. And this country's history, as Owais said, is so rich in terms of resistance, whether it is resistance to military dictatorship, whether it's resistance to new laws that like the PECA, whether it's resistance to, it's ethnic, it's religious, it's a bunch. And I don't think we can downplay that. And just a gentle reminder that we are only 75 years old. So hopefully things can get better, but absolutely, you have to bring people together and everyone has a role to play in making that happen.
Thank you so much for your time, Owais Tohid and Muna. And you rightly pointed out towards the end, after discussing what could be the reasons why the division exists, that unity, bringing people together, and the role of editors is immensely important for us to, bring this journalism back to what it should be, what needs to be practiced, and also to train the younger journalists, the ethics, the norms, and only that's the way forward. Thank you so much for your time. We'll catch you again. Goodbye.